progressive case for Bitcoin is potentially even stronger than the conservative one, that are a huge barrier to entry for a lot of people because they see it through political lenses and all these other lenses that exist at the, fiscal political layer and above. And what I think Bitcoiners are very attuned to is the monetary layer beneath that. And we need to do a better job of getting people to understand that layer so that they can understand how the problems tend to originate at that layer and bubble up to those. If you're in those countries, you don't have access to the US stock market. You can't hide from inflation and assets like we can, but you can escape through Bitcoin. It's really just a matter of meeting people where they are. And the way that I would talk to progressives about Bitcoin is a lot different than the way that I would talk to conservatives. Ultimately, all roads generally point back to Bitcoin.
You said something interesting. You said there's a marketing problem in Bitcoin. What do you mean by that?
I think it's on a lot of fronts. One of them is I think there tends to be a immune response from Bitcoiners when it comes to anybody that might even be perceptually threatening them. And so, we go after shitcoiners, we go after people in traditional finance. There's obviously a large political battle that has been going on, especially in the prior Biden administration, where you've got Operation Choke Point 2.0, things like that. But I don't know that we're as welcoming as we could be. Because when we're telling shitcoiners and altcoiners, people that are just, dabbling in other cryptocurrencies, what we're really saying is you're an idiot and you don't deserve wealth. You don't deserve a better life unless you come over and, see things our way. Right. And rather than educate them or try to bring them along and make it, just a more welcoming environment, I've just never, ever seen anything work where people are insulting people and then saying, but come on to our side. And so there's something to that. And I think that there's a lot of people that do a great job, Lynn Alden among others, of making it more accessible. But you have to meet people where they are. And so, for example, I think that the progressive case for Bitcoin is potentially even stronger than the conservative one. And we can break down these political barriers that are a huge barrier to entry for a lot of people because they see it through political lenses and all these other lenses that exist at the, fiscal political layer and above. And what I think Bitcoiners are very attuned to is the monetary layer beneath that. And we need to do a better job of getting people to understand that layer so that they can understand how the problems tend to originate at that layer and bubble up to those. So we're dealing with primarily, it seems to me, the symptoms of problems rather than the root cause. And I think that Bitcoiners have a great grasp of the root cause of the problem.
That's super interesting. It's actually something that I talked about when I'm guest on other podcasts on what we can improve in Bitcoin, because I think this mindset of have fun staying poor. I think that's
Exactly.
that's not something good. I think we should be welcoming, and if I think we all as Bitcoiners went through a journey of not understanding Bitcoin, dismissing
Exactly.
Bitcoin, calling Bitcoin a scam, maybe even something worse, and then seeing Bitcoin because someone else explained it to us, someone else made it understand either directly or through a book or through a podcast or through whatever.
Right.
And if we just say, if we have debates on, let's say, Twitter and why is that and you just say have fun staying poor, you end the conversation.
Right.
You have a very
Exactly.
negative connotation to Bitcoin all of a sudden.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just it's not a good message. Nobody wants to be insulted and then look at, whatever else that person's going to say. It's not effective. And so Um, I think that we can do a better job as a community of providing real education, because the problems are very real. Bitcoin, in my opinion, is a huge part of the solution to those problems. But people lack the understanding, and they lack the language to articulate the unfreedom that they feel in our system. And I think Bitcoin provides that understanding and that language so that they can better understand what the problem is and why Bitcoin is at least a part of the solution to those problems.
Very true. You said something in the middle there with progressive case and conservative case for Bitcoin, and how you like the progressive. I think you said that you like the progressive case more, if I can remember correctly. Are you talking about the overall the books, because there are two books, progressive case and conservative case, or the overall, like what do you mean by that?
Banking the unbanked. There's roughly 5.7 billion people in the world that do not have access to modern banking. These are people that live under oppressive regimes. If you look at Africa, if you look at Central America, if you look at South America, you look at what's going on in Ukraine, you look at all of these areas where there's conflict and there's hyperinflation. Bitcoin is the solution to their financial problems. The best thing that many of those people can do, and Seyr, others have pointed this out, you don't really have a choice to stay in the local currency when you're in Argentina, or you're in Turkey, or you're in all of these areas where the value of your currency completely collapses by, on a monthly basis, yearly. You don't have an ability to take that money with you into the future, or at least take the value of it with you into the future. And so Bitcoin allows all of us to do that without being geo-locked, without capital controls, without all these things that prevent people from moving in the world in the way that they otherwise could. And, I've seen stories of people, women in Afghanistan, where they don't really have property rights, but Bitcoin offers it. And so if you're in those countries, you don't have access to the US stock market. You can't hide from inflation in assets like we can, but you can escape through Bitcoin. And that, to me, when you look at it, Jack Mahler's put it so well, is that money is our time and energy in abstracted form. And to the degree that all of us work and try to provide value to others, if you have a system that is sucking that value out of the money that we're storing, they're stealing your time and energy. And I just can't think of anything more important than for people living under those circumstances that billions and billions of people are, to get out of that system that is robbing you and move it into Bitcoin where they can't extract it from you. It's just that to me is just so profound that Bitcoin offers that. And that to me is like maybe the biggest story in Bitcoin is property rights for people that have been denied it for, in some cases, generations and generations and generations.
Yeah, the power that comes with having Bitcoin, especially for those who can't otherwise protect themselves. I mean, in the Western world, we have a lot of tools like ETFs and the stock market
Right.
and even real estate products and stuff like that, where we can actually have protection against inflation and against the monetary expansion, where others might not even have the access towards that. There are more people that potentially have the access to Bitcoin that there are people that have a bank account. So that's just tremendous for me. What power Bitcoin could bring to those underprivileged communities.
Yeah, I mean, Alex Gladstein makes the case so well too. When it comes to, this marketing problem I'm talking about, it's really just a matter of meeting people where they are. And the way that I would talk to progressives about Bitcoin is a lot different than the way that I would talk to conservatives. And the resources that are out there that we can point people to, can just better speak their language. And then they'll start going down the rabbit hole as so many of us have themselves. And, for me, I thought Bitcoin was just a Ponzi scheme. I was like, this is a grift. I don't, when I first started looking into it back in 2016, that's just what I thought, because I think that's a lot of people's reflexive reaction. Because I was looking at it like I was looking at a stock. There's no cash flows here. There's nobody, like, what is this? It just seems like an unregistered security that operates like a Ponzi scheme. And I think that that's where a lot of us start, we'll start dabbling in other coins and whatever, but ultimately all roads generally point back to Bitcoin. And the reason for that is Bitcoin, because it has no natural issuer, because it is devoid of all these other properties that allow our existing system to suck up value from us, whether it's through taxes, whether it's through inflation, or any number of things that the federal, state, local governments can do. The fact that Bitcoin is outside of that system becomes so interesting. And again, when you look at what it can do for, whether it's, people in America that are dealing with debasement, that are dealing with getting unbanked. I mean, listening to Mark Andreessen talk about all the tech people that got debanked during Biden, those are real problems. And so none of the other cryptos offer that solution because they're generally centralized. They don't have the properties of Bitcoin that can actually defend your wealth and defend your purchasing power. So, for me, for you, for countless others, I think that once you've put in the time to understand that, Bitcoin just emerges as a unique solution to the problem. And again, if people want to gamble on these other coins, have at it. But Bitcoin is the truth.
How did you come to that? Like you said, like you went through the scam phase of like Bitcoin as a pyramid scheme to now finding the signal of Bitcoin only.
Well, I'll tell you what solidified it. I think that there's probably a lot of details I could go into prior to this, but what solidified it was COVID. I was in Minneapolis at the time, and we locked down, and me and my wife have the benefit of working from home. We have the benefit of owning our home. We have assets. And we were able to ride that inflation wave by doing nothing different than we basically already were. And when I looked at my friends that have jobs where they have to physically be there, that they could no longer go to, many don't have assets. That to me was heartbreaking. And I went into a mode then that I hope to never enter again. But I was just so worried about their financial safety, about their health, about all of those things, and I felt very guilty because my net worth was skyrocketing during that time, doing what I've been doing anyway, because they kept on talking about, the news during that time, I don't know if you remember, was all about this K-shaped recovery. You remember that? And all that is the value of the dollar is going straight down, which forces asset prices way up. And so if you're somebody who was living paycheck to paycheck, you're getting screwed. And meanwhile, all of the value that is in that system is I'm saying that the wrong way, but if you have the dollar going down, asset prices have to reprice up because the denominator itself is losing value. Most people don't really think about the dollar having a denominator, but in practical purposes it does, and that's directly influenced by the money supply and interest rates. And when interest rates collapse and the money supply surges, you're going to see asset inflation. And so that to me was like, I'm not competing any longer in the market. That's just showing the extremes of what our system is capable of, which is we can destroy people that save in dollars. We can destroy and make much more difficult the lives of people that are working paycheck to paycheck, that need those dollars now and that do not have the opportunity to invest in assets where they can ride that inflation wave up. And so for me, Bitcoin was important prior to that, but it became a moral and ethical imperative after that.
It's the not only it's a good asset to own, but it's also an ethical asset, a moral asset, something that actually makes the world better and makes you wealthy at the same time, which is an amazing combination that you can have that in one asset, basically.
Yeah. I mean, and that's why it's I just treat it. So back when I looked at it, like I look at, stocks or, things like that, then it becomes something that it's like, okay, maybe I'll trade this. And I think that's what a lot of people come to Bitcoin for. It's like, I can make some money here. I can make some dollars here. But once you start peeling back those layers of the onion and it does become, like it is for so many of us, an ethical and moral imperative, it's not something that I'll ever trade. It's the only thing I won't trade. I don't really care about, the Apple stock. And it's not an ethical, moral imperative for me. So, but Bitcoin is something where, it is tough. Especially in that last cycle, riding it from the 60s back down to 30, back up to 69, and back down to 16, right? It's not fun, but if you really believe in it, and it is an ethical and moral imperative that you do as much as you can to educate people about what Bitcoin is and why it's important, and especially if it's on sale, maybe it's something you should look at getting even more of. That's what it is to me. And so hopefully I'll never have to sell Bitcoin and just, continue to try to educate people on its benefits.
What do you think are the implications of Bitcoin on society?
Man, is there a bigger question? I think a couple things, I guess. One is that it offers an alternative that is completely outside the system. And that is important. Let me try to think about how I want to put this. If there's no escape hatch and there's no other place to put your money, you're gonna constantly be a victim of, and as Jeff Booth puts it, like this extractive system that is pulling from you via taxes, it's pulling from you via debasement, and a variety of other methods. And it's also a release valve where this excess liquidity that hits the economy actually has a place to go to that, you know, as Seyr puts it, is more thermodynamically sound, right? So it doesn't have the leakage that our system does, where I used to have a rental property here in Scottsdale, and I don't know that I'll ever have one again, because when you look at how much it just sucks from you, you have taxes, you have, dealing with tenants, you have replacement of all these, like it just offers you a better vehicle without the extraction that is baked into our system. And so when you have more capital moving over into Bitcoin, it is a clear signal to the Fed, it is a clear signal to politicians that we have an alternative if you continue to fuck with us.
That exit valve, I love that.
And that is maybe the most important component to it, is that even if Bitcoin's price stays flat for the next decade, it won't, but if it were to, it's really somewhat immaterial, because what would hopefully then be happening is they're actually treating, and this is all governments that run on fiat, is that they're actually treating their people better, to where they might have a little more faith in their own system and their own currencies, where they're not taking all of the value that they're providing to that system and moving it out of it because they no longer trust it. To me, among so many other things, Bitcoin is insurance against that.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so we have an escape now, and you aren't going to close it. You know, this whole governments will ban it is really only still talked about by people who haven't done any research into Bitcoin.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I mean, Putin, I can't remember what conference he was at, but he said, who can stop Bitcoin? No one. And he just laughed. Putin's a lot of things, but he's not dumb. And, that if the US government could have done something about it, they would have, and they haven't, because they can't. And so that's what, I remember when Grayscale won its lawsuit, that was a very clear signal. And the BlackRock ETF filing came, I believe, immediately after it. And that was that was capitulation. It's, we can't do shit about this, so we need to participate in it. And that's, among so many other things that Jason Lowery gets into, is so interesting, is it's not a negotiation. So Bitcoin to me is kind of like the Eye of Sauron. We're going to, I mean, you fuck around and, you're going to find out.
What is the Eye of Sauron? What is that?
Lord of the Rings. It's so, the way that I look at it is, we're keeping watch over you, and we're standing here. You know that we're here, right? Governments, you know that the Bitcoin network is here, and we are going to get stronger the more irresponsible and the worse that you treat your people. Like I'm tripping over my words here a little bit with that, but to the degree that you are not treating your people well and respecting the time and energy that they put in to, yeah, you could go down to the degree that you aren't respecting your people, we're going to be sucking up all of that value out of your system and into our own. And so it's just, it's a really powerful message to governments that we're done with you doing whatever you want because we can't escape your financial system. And I think that's going to force governments, and you're already seeing it, to compete for people. I mean, companies have to compete for, all of our capital. And I think it's going to force governments to do the same thing where maybe they will have better tax treatments to encourage people to come over there. Maybe they're going to have more advantageous tax provisions for Bitcoin. And they're going to be competing for people by creating the best possible environment for them because they know they have a choice now. And that's really important because what Bitcoin does so well is it avoids all capital controls.
That's so amazing. And the thing, I think the really big one is with the exit valve that you also brought up, because now all of a sudden, I think the reason why Facebook, for example, with Mark Zuckerberg is trying to get on the we are censorship resistant and we're not banning people bandwagon after
Right.
Elon did it, is just because he saw people leaving Twitter, leaving Facebook to Twitter. And I also think it's great that we have Nostra. So if people leave Twitter for Nostra, Twitter will rethink things. So that exit valve is so important to improve the system. So in a way, the US dollar and the fiat currencies will be in the medium term better because of Bitcoin, because they're like, if we print 50% of the money supply, this will straight go to Bitcoin.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, the more irresponsible governments are, the stronger Bitcoin becomes. So what is that going to encourage? I mean, it's really that simple.
That's I think in almost 450 episodes of the podcast now, nobody put it that way. Actually, that's interesting. The more responsible. That's a good way to look at it. Just for the people that maybe are curious now about you and never seen you on other podcasts, what are you doing and what's actually your background?
Yeah, so I'm the founder of Hot Pixel Group. I've had it for, I think this is the 15th year. So what we do primarily is build web platforms for startups. I've worked on a lot of digital transformations for Fortune 500s. So I've been primarily focused, though, in FinTech for the last decade. So I was the first engineer at they were pretty small at the time. They're fairly big now. A company called DataSite. So I don't want to get into like what percentage they might handle because I could be way off now, but they handle they handle a lot of the world's mergers and acquisitions. So when Elon bought Twitter, that happened on the platform. When Microsoft bought LinkedIn, that happened on the platform. And so I worked for 4.5 years building that up with them, worked a lot with investment bankers, in those usability studies from JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, et cetera. And I then went over and helped lead a digital transformation at Ameriprise Financial. And it was from that initiative that I'm now serving as a director of engineering for a bond brokerage in Oklahoma City. We also have our own platforms. So one is for the construction industry, called Digsley. Shout out to Brent Ramsey, my partner. He and I have built a lot of things over the years with a lot of other very talented people. And and then just launched a marketplace that's basically the eBay for museums with our partners in the museum industry.
Interesting. And eBay for museums, so you can buy antique things for your own museum.
Well, yeah, the not to get in too deep into it, but when you look at all of the exhibitions, you look at art, those things have to move around the world. If museums keep their contents static, people aren't going to show up to look at the same stuff, right? So there's a huge marketplace for that. The problem is that the museums don't know what other museums have, and there's an ecosystem that exists there. It's just there's a lot of friction in it, and so what this platform aims to do is to remove that friction. But
that's interesting.
But primarily, I've been involved in FinTech for, like I said, about 10 years now. I've also consulted with Bitcoin companies, and the first one actually, they ended up folding when things went sideways in what was that? Can't remember, but 2018, and that was my first foray into consulting with Bitcoin companies, and so have some experience there. But my expertise lies at the intersection with finance and technology. So I'm primarily focused on software engineering and building out teams to execute on the goals that startups and mid-cap, large-cap companies have.
Let's take a break for a moment and appreciate the beauty that Coin Vigilante has made with the Bitcoin watches. Those watches are the most amazing, the most elegant way of showing that you are a true Bitcoiner. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece. Make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. And now if you have Bitcoin, I really do hope that you don't have it on exchange. But if you do have it on exchange, I have two ways for you to deal with that. The first way is you put it on a hardware wallet. That's the entry for you to get into the self-custody game. I recommend BitBox, Bitcoin only edition for that. It's a super simple and secure way. And if you check out the link in the description, you even get 5% off if you use the code Robin. And the second way is the Bitcoin Way. The Bitcoin Way is your all-in partner in terms of how to get the most out of your sovereignty. They will personalize for you a self-custody setup that is perfect for your individual situation. They will show you how you can secure your own devices. Securing your Bitcoin is not enough. You also have to keep all your devices secure. One topic that is overlooked often is the inheritance plan. What happens with your Bitcoin once you are no longer here? Do you have a plan for that in place already? And last but not least, if you're in a jurisdictions where you don't feel safe, it's better to get a plan B. For all that, head over to thebitcoinway.com/Robin to get a 30-minute free call. And just a quick side note, I will be for the first time ever speaking at the Bitcoin Prague event in June. It will be absolutely legendary and I'm really looking forward to seeing all of you there. You can get your ticket in the link down in the description of Bitcoin Prague, and very important, use code Robin to get 10% off your ticket. I'm really looking forward seeing you there. That's super interesting. It's also like the intersection between technology and finance where Bitcoin basically makes the most sense if you look at that. What have you learned from the FinTech space? A lot of them are actually very dismissive, what I've learned on Bitcoin.
Oh, they still are. Look, so I don't want to get into any specific details, just because it's a client, but they work with roughly 1,000 banks in the United States. Those banks are not interested in Bitcoin whatsoever at all. Their whole model, the way that they look at their portfolios is it's all about risk, and especially interest rate risk. And they cannot take the risks that investment banks can. So the noise that you hear within the TradFi community about Bitcoin is really the companies that can afford to explore and hold Bitcoin, and they've been working on their custody solutions for a long time. All the banks are working on that, or all the big banks are, but that's not a majority of banks in this country. There's credit unions, there's community banks, there's so many banks, and if you were to go there and one of the brokers were to start pitching them Bitcoin, you'd get laughed out of the bank. That's just not where they are. They also are, many are still so underwater from the Fed's actions that started in November 2021. They're still underwater on that. And that's why you had the bank term funding program that had to step in, which was basically a bailout, right? So when you have kind of a front row seat to this, and you're seeing I don't want to call it corruption, it's just how it works, right? Hey, we'll just launch a program that's going to last for 12 months. And hey, all those bonds that you bought that are at half their value now, don't worry about it, because we're not going to value them at market. We're going to value them at par, which is whatever you paid for them. So just take that forward. So you and I let's say we invest in some stocks, and let's say the price craters by 50%. And the government then comes in and says, hey, Robin and Harry, we see all these big losses you took. But you know what? They're not really losses. We're going to value them at whatever you bought them. And just continue to conduct business as you would, as though that's what the value is. Does that sound reasonable? Does that sound fair? Does that sound like a system that you want to be a part of, where the rules can change at any minute as long as it suits their needs? Is that egalitarian? And that's what people need to pay more attention to. Caitlin Long and what she is doing and has been doing with Custodia Bank in Wyoming. I'm unaware of anybody that has fought harder, both for Bitcoin, but to just have a bank that has proper collateral and backing for customer deposits to avoid situations like what we had in 0809, which is the genesis of Bitcoin itself. So there's just so many great people that are doing so many good things in the Bitcoin space, that I think that's one of the main drivers for the adoption that you're seeing from people that really have a long history in traditional finance. They're the ones who are probably some of the biggest Bitcoin proponents, because they understand the problems with this system the most. They see the inefficiencies. They see, I can tell you that banks that I've worked with, they still operate off of COBOL mainframes in some cases. These are not, there is so much inefficiency in traditional finance that Bitcoin solves. But more than anything, it solves the problem of 12 unelected chimps printing more money and determining the value of our dollar at any given moment. And again, I just come back to, for me personally, that was, my experience in early 2020 and all the way through. That to me is like, this is just completely wrong. I just felt terrible with what was going on, and having to watch it. I was working with Ameriprise Financial at the time too. And, being the being a beneficiary, I guess, of that system, it just felt gross because we're not competing anymore. It just felt wrong. So anyways, I'm going down some different tracks here, but you know, if you've worked in fintech, if you've worked in banking, and especially the technical areas of TradFi, and then you see Bitcoin, I'm with Jack Mallers. I think the whole financial system eventually spills out onto the Bitcoin protocol because it's so much more efficient, secure, and it obviates the need for a lot of the rails that the world currently operates on. And so, to put a more precise point on when I fully cut over, so not only was there that in COVID, but, and I think it was Jack Mallers that said this, but it made perfect sense to me, is that the internet is an open permissionless protocol for information. So HTTP, TCP, which is what all of my apps sit on. It's what all the teams that I've created. We don't create a new internet to launch our apps on it. There's a reason that AOL died, right? Closed systems do not work as well as open, permissionless, open source especially, systems. And so we have an open permissionless protocol for information. Bitcoin is just that for money. And when I really looked at it that way and stopped looking at it as a stock, and this is where the value is so disconnected. I mean, I'm looking here, so Bitcoin's at 84. The reason Bitcoin's so volatile is, imagine pricing what the value of the internet itself is. Who knows what the hell that is, right? But I know it's worth more than all of the tech companies and all the trillions that they have, right? Because they can't operate without it. So if the internet had a bearer type instrument that moved across its rails, just like Bitcoin does on its, like, we might not need Bitcoin, right? Because we'd already have that capability on HTTP, TCP, but we don't. And so that's what Bitcoin represents to me, is that if we're trying to value a protocol, not a company, and it's the first time that we've ever been able to do it.
It's super interesting of thinking, like, what if the internet, the TCP/IP protocol had a native token to it, where all the values in there. Naturally, the native token has to be greater than the value or equal to the value of all the things above it combined, which is super interesting. In many ways, Bitcoin is that native token to the internet.
Yeah. I mean, it can't function without it, right? So, yeah, I mean, once you stop looking at it as a stock, a company, like how those things are valued and evaluated is completely different than how Bitcoin should be evaluated. And Bitcoin is going to be in price discovery for a very long time because we just don't know. But what we do know is that it's not worth nothing, as so many people proclaim. I mean, Peter Schiff is still out there. I can't believe Peter just keeps going. I mean, I've never seen anybody look dumber. And he's still at it. And just like, it's going to zero. Okay. But like, we value it. And therefore it does have value. So it's above zero. And when I see, some of the price targets out there, they do seem insane. But I wouldn't doubt if we get there, because more and more people are beginning to understand the value of being in this alternative system as a hedge against the one that they're in. And I don't know of anyone, Democrats, Republicans, it doesn't matter. No one thinks that the existing system is working well, even those that benefit from it tremendously. Because if they're honest with themselves, it's just not. and Bitcoin solves a lot of the problems that exist in our traditional financial system.
What do you
And
think will happen? What do you think will happen to the traditional, like the community banks, to the giant banks? I personally haven't been to a bank since a very long time. I have a bank account to interact with the fiat system, but I don't keep any value there. It's just a way of communicating with the fiat system. If more and more people do that, like what happens to all those banks?
hard to know. I mean, it's still such early stages. I do think it poses a unique opportunity to them if they were to start looking at Bitcoin and offering those services. The problem is that they still don't really have clear regulations, and hopefully we can get some of those things done. The Genius Act looks really positive for stablecoins. I think that's going to, when people talk about on ramps and off ramps from TradFi into Bitcoin, one of the things that I think, especially if that act is passed, where banks can start leveraging stablecoins, is once you're in that system, I look at stablecoins being your checking account and Bitcoin being your savings account. I think that is a reasonable first step for many of them. How that ultimately impacts them, I'm not sure, because I firmly believe in self-custody, right? Which would obviate the need for banks, period. And so, but when it comes to, like, I wouldn't have my mom self-custody. I just wouldn't. And so if a bank is offering Bitcoin custody services for her, great. And I think that that's where a lot of people will likely end up is, you know, when you log into your online Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, whatever, you will have checking, savings, Bitcoin. And eventually I think all the savings will go to Bitcoin. And I think to the degree that people have enough to fund their lives for, you know, 3 months out of their checking, whatever, I think all the rest of that will just end up in Bitcoin. There's problems with that, right? The whole idea with Bitcoin is removing counterparty risk. So one of the things that the bond brokerage, some of the board members there that I've talked to about it, do get really interested in when it comes to Bitcoin is when you say that Bitcoin has no counterparty risk, what the hell does that mean? Because their whole world is counterparty risk and hedging it. So what do you mean that there is something that can have counterparty risk that is now making its way into our system? I mean, they know what's going on with the ETFs. They understand all that. Maybe they heard about MicroStrategy's, you know, corporate bonds, et cetera. But this stuff is it's so nascent. It's so new. They're just not there yet. And you also have there is a major gap with our understanding of technology and how ambient it is to our life. That is not the life of, like, people that are 60 plus that are running these banks, that are running these companies. It's not that. I mean, some of these people are going to struggle to attach a PDF to an email. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to talk to them about Bitcoin. So the short answer is I think what's going to happen in very short order is that for sure there's going to be Bitcoin custody services at banks. Like, that is underway. It's going to happen. I'm not sure who the first one will actually be, to where when you go to online checking and you can actually have it there. How they handle that, how they handle the transparency around it, I think will be interesting. You know, are we going to see something like, you know, proof of reserves from those banks? I don't know, but we should. And if they can't, you shouldn't custody it there. So again, to come back to one of your questions from minutes ago, it's going to force better behavior. It's going to force more transparency. Institutions are going to need to be less opaque because we have an alternative that is out on a public blockchain. that gets audited every 10 minutes. How are you going to compete against that?
You can't.
Right. How are you going to compete against it? I mean, what you can offer is there's still UX problems around self-custody, around there's backdoors that, you know, we've all heard about. There is risk there, but those things will get solved. And there's a lot of great people working on it. You know, for as much flack as I've seen Jack Dorsey get for what he did with BitKey, that solves a major problem. And now I saw they just rolled out inheritance, another big problem. So when you have brilliant people like that working on technical solutions to these problems, and that community of engineers is growing, there's so many people in traditional finance, engineers, that are aggressively moving over into Bitcoin. That's another thing, is that you have brain drain from traditional finance into Bitcoin. So how are you going to compete with this open protocol? I mean, good luck.
That's a good point of like, who wants to work in a bank these days? Like
Right.
like imagine like an 18-year-old and we're like what will I do with my life? What's really my passion? Like, oh, like I will work in a community bank. Nothing against community banks, but like
Yeah.
I think the overall talent, like the tech talent, will they want to work at like SpaceX or like working at an open source protocol like Bitcoin, and not at a community bank.
Exactly. I mean, so just follow the talent, and you can generally see what the trajectory of any industry will be. There's so many things that Bitcoin has going for it. And I know that many people in traditional finance are just they have no idea how far along a lot of this stuff really is, and they have no idea how quickly it's going to come for them. And they're just fundamentally like offsides.
Yeah,
and
I get that.
And I just, it's hard for me to even explain how offsides they are. Like we can all understand that so many industries have gone through these digital transformations because there's obvious examples to it. And when people talk about dematerializing the physical world and moving that up into a digital layer, that's why we don't have Blockbuster anymore. Everything's on Netflix. That's why we don't have, so many things just get sublimated and are made better through digital services that can move at the speed of light. But they struggle with understanding that about money itself, because most people can't answer the question, what is money? So if you can't answer that question, then, and you're really, like I said originally, you're not dealing with the monetary like base layer where all of this starts. You're dealing with the fiscal and political layer and every layer on top of it. And so that base layer, because it's so misunderstood, they don't understand what it is, never mind a digital transformation that is going on with it. And it's been underway since Bitcoin launched. And it's going to continue to improve. It's going to continue to get stronger. The use cases are going to be better understood. And you also have a situation where I think it's something like $67 trillion that are currently held by boomers. All of that is going to get inherited by a generation that is digitally native. You think they're going to invest in bonds? Absolutely not. So, I mean, the fact Bitcoin, again, I'm looking at the fact that Bitcoin's trading at 84 grand is a joke. So, and price isn't all that's important, but it is a measure of adoption. And we're barely scratching the surface.
It's a scoreboard of like how bad fiat is doing and how good Bitcoin is getting adopted. Like those two kind of things are in there. So a lot of people don't like to look at the price, but I think it's actually kind of a unique thing that we have that. Like, imagine Bitcoin without the price. It's like the internet. You can, then you have to, I mean, Seyr is an amazing example because he wrote about the mobile wave, he wrote about the internet, and he just bought like this Apple, Microsoft, Google, all of them. Because in the internet, if you want to profit from that, you have to buy a basket of companies to have a representation of what the internet value actually is. With Bitcoin, you can just buy the base layer bare token, and you're like, hey, like that, if Bitcoin network is getting adopted by 2x, 3x, 5x, the base layer token will be 2x, 3x, 5x, and it's a really cool way to look at it from a technology standpoint. And then it's like, then you go deeper and it's like, oh, like it's my savings technology, it's the best asset, and stuff like that. But just from, if you're excited about technology and seeing the Bitcoin network as a technology, like you have to be excited about the base layer token also, like the representation of how much you can buy. And I like to actually denominate Bitcoin not in a fiat currency, but like in gold, or like, okay, how much of a house does 10 Bitcoin or 1 Bitcoin buy you? Like, I think that's a more interesting way to measure the growth of the purchasing power of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Because when you do it in fiat, you also have the monetary inflation in there. So like, I do think price or the growing purchasing power of Bitcoin is a very valuable insight in the adoption. But also, like, there's hash rate, there's other things that are really interesting to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bitcoiners are used to, I mean, we all talk about it, right? Like the price of everything is collapsing relative to Bitcoin, right? But that's just not how most people think about it, because they're still in dollar denominated world. And when you can show them how much the dollar is collapsing against that, and then you talk to them about how insane it is to save in that currency. So like, there's a lot of people that are so fearful. The system has instilled so much fear in them that there's a ton of people. I mean, I have friends and family members that still store a lot of money just in dollars in a savings account. And when you ask them, like, why are you willing to take, best case scenario is the Fed hits its target of 2%. They just took 2% of the value. They attached a value vacuum to your savings account and stole 2% of it every year. Why are you okay with that? Just why are you okay with that? And in COVID, you know, I mean, that rate was 10% higher. I mean, those are official numbers. So if you look at things like trueflation, I mean, there's all kinds of other metrics you can look at, but you know, real estate prices where I live went up 50% in the span of a couple of years. That's unbelievable, which means that your purchasing power, I mean, if you were looking to buy a house, you were saving up for it, it just cost you 50% more in the span of no time at all. And had you held assets that could ride that wave, or you held Bitcoin, which has ridden it better than any of them, you'd be in a much better position. But they are so fearful. And this goes back to my original point, is you have to address that fear first, because there is no education around money, finance, investing. Like that is not taught in America, at least.
It's in most schools, unfortunately, not taught the finance aspect of it. You kind of have to deal with it yourself.
Yeah, you know, and you've got people like Dave Ramsey out there, who I think is fantastic for people. If you're in a lot of debt or whatever, he's a great person to listen to get out of it. But once you're at neutral, how are you going to make, like, you have to, there is such thing as good debt. I mean, I remember there was a clip of him that went viral, I think with Graham Stephan, where he's like, would you take $100 million, 0%, 0% interest, $100 million. You can put it in US treasuries, get 5%. You're making $5 million a year. He's like, would you do it? He's like, no, I wouldn't do it. And he's just laughing. He's like, why not? He's like, I don't do debt. And it's because, whatever his past is and his fear of that type of debt, but it's a guaranteed return with no interest, won't take it. And that is a guy that millions of people listen to for financial advice. So it's just no wonder that if that's the base understanding that you have, Bitcoin's that much scarier to you. And that's what we've got to overcome when we are just answering people's questions about like what Bitcoin is, what is the problem and why it's the solution. But you've got to deal with some of those things first. And people have just been needled with this idea that debt is really bad in any form, and that you should be scared of things because the value of them can go down, even if the trajectory of it over years is demonstrably up. So I think that, we've got to deal with those things first when we're talking to people about Bitcoin, and that's what I try to do.
That's great. I can see that you're a great educator. There's one question that I ask each and every one of my guests, and the question is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
Oh man, not much. The reason that I care about technology, and the reason that I care about Bitcoin, the reason that I do what I do is fundamentally just to help people. I've just dedicated the better part of 20 years to doing as much as I can for others, providing opportunities for myself, but that's through the efforts of others, which are all trying to solve problems for people. And so I think if you get up every day and you just try to do as much as you can for others, you're going to help yourself, you're going to help your family, you're going to help your community. If you can do all those things, you can maybe help your state. And if you can do that, you can maybe help your country. And, I'm just trying to do that in my own small way. And Bitcoin is just another, I think, tool that can help me do that. And I hope it can help, others do the same. It has fundamentally changed the way that, I view the world. And so just try to help others. I think that's all that we should be doing. And yeah, that's me getting really preachy.
I think it's great to help others. I think it also ties back perfectly to how we actually started the podcast of like kindly orange pilling and not saying have fun staying poor and being helpful to other people.
Yeah. Just, I post my thoughts, on X. You can find me there. And we did, by the way, I should mention two of my friends here in Scottsdale, very deep into Bitcoin, whole family's into it. We started a community here, if you're in Phoenix, Scottsdale, called Bitcoin Social Club. So we're getting that moving. We had our first event and looking to do a lot more of them.
Really cool. I think that ties also really good to our end routine, where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And the question from the previous guest is, what is the most important thing one can do for Bitcoin?
Educate yourself so that you can educate others, if they're open to being educated. I think there is so much information out there, and it's hard to digest it all. But if you can do that, I don't see how your life won't improve and how you can't improve the lives of others. So it's fundamentally education. And I think if you can, listen to people like Lynn Alden and others that are great macro thinkers, I think that your life is going to get a lot better. I don't really have a great answer for that, but just continue to educate yourself so that you can be knowledgeable if people have questions for you.
I think that's a great way to look at it. Thank you so much, Harry, for being on the show. Before I let you go, you already teased that you are on X. Is that the best place for people to reach out to you?
Yeah, you can find me there. It's Harry G. Beckwith on X. You can also go to my website. It's hotpixelgroup.com. And yeah, look for Bitcoin Social Club, which is also on there. We're going to be having more events out here, and it's all free and just in service to community and people that are interested in learning more about Bitcoin.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Harry, for being on. Also, thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you.